Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Episode. Today we're going to continue the series, the Unported playlist, where I take a look at my favorite unported arcade games of all time. And today we're playing Shadow Force by Technos. It's one of their last beat-em-ups they ever made, and they're way more well known for Double Dragon and games like Comma Tribes. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if it feels so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But Technos loved making beat-em-up games. They made so many of them, and each one was individually new and unique. Shadow Force being that you could possess every single enemy you see on screen and steal their moveset. It is easy in practice, hard in execution, because this game has 6 independent buttons. This is a 6-button beat-em-up. It's like a Street Fighter setup, except for a beat-em-up arcade game. And in my opinion, they probably could have gotten it down to 4 buttons, because when you're playing this game, sometimes you forget some of the other buttons for high and low attacks even exist, because who's ever played a 6-button beat 'em up before? But short of the strange control scheme, this game is an absolute blast to play. It is very long though. A game of this is going to take you about 45 minutes to see from start to finish, and towards the back third of the game it definitely feels like it is just extending its runtime out a little bit to get a couple more quarters off of you. But considering 99% of you aren't going to actually be putting quarters into this whatsoever, it means nothing in the grand scheme of things, because a good beat 'em up's a good beat 'em up, and Shadow Force is definitely in that B tier of the effort for the genre. It's going to be a lot more fun if you bring a friend, because a lot of times the enemies on the screen are going to gang up on you, so if you can take someone in with you and each take half of the screen, it's going to be a much easier experience. As this game, especially in later stages, does not pull any punches in its difficulty even at normal. But I will say, visually, the first stage is definitely my favorite until we get to the last stage. I just really like the overall industrial aesthetic with these work elevators on what is clearly a construction site. The stage art definitely does vary though, and I feel like in Technos games that kind of happens more often than not. The first stage is going to show you something absolutely spectacular, but the middle of the game is going to lose a little bit of that inspiration. But the combat is the same the entire game, and that's a good thing, because this is solid beat 'em up combat. You don't end up in many of the situations where you're not attacking your enemy even though you feel like you're on their same plane. That's one of my biggest complaints with beat 'em ups, when you think you should be striking an enemy but you're whiffing all your attacks. Some games commit that sin, but here in Shadow Force you don't really have that issue whatsoever. And I will say that you do get some power-ups as well, and those should be reserved just for beating bosses. You have 1 power-up per continue, and when you use that on a boss, his life bar is going to go down by almost a third. Do not use them on regular enemies, especially if you're trying to minimize your credit usage. This is where you want to save them right here, because you'll see we switch over characters, but when we do this special right now, you're going to see that boss's life bar basically just go down to almost 0. From there, you can definitely get staggered and knocked around. It'll be much more difficult to actually end the fight, but we took like 60% of the boss's health bar away with 1 special. So as a strategy, make sure you conserve those. It's going to make your gameplay so much easier. And I will show you more of the soul swapping technique in just a minute. Stealing the bodies of your opponents is always a fun time, but it's not the way I usually play the game, so you're going to see it intermittently here and there in the capture. Now, like I said, it seems like Technos loves to show their best art up front and at the end, and now that we moved on to the next stage, we're in this very generic countryside with a mountain in the background. There's nothing really going on, there's very little parallax scrolling, and when you get here, it's just one gigantic gray rock wall. It doesn't look horrible, but it's not the most inspiring thing, and it seems like that was basically every Technos game. They always have something interesting to show you, but not all the time. And I will say that there is a technique of stealing the body of your opponent that works for you. Whichever enemy on screen is the hardest to beat or giving you the most trouble, take their body. That removes them from the screen. Even if they don't have a great attack that you want to use, you can jump back out of their body and it kills them. So if you have a screen with 3 or 4 players, even if you don't want to steal the body and use the attacks, do it anyway. It's going to take that character off the screen. It doesn't seem like the game actually replaces them. So it's a totally valid strategy that you should 100% be using. But I will say Technos was never a slouch when it came to the music department. So of course you're going to get a sound sample. Listen for like 35 seconds. I'll be back and show you a lot more game. Solid soundtrack, solid B tier effort, and that's kind of what Shadow Force really is. It's that solid B tier effort, because not every single game can be Final Fight or Streets of Rage or something like Night Slashers from Day to East. You have to have the Shadow Forces of the world as well, and that's not a knock on this game whatsoever. It just seems to be that basically nobody remembers this game ever exists. Combat Tribe, sure, Double Dragon, absolutely, but Shadow Force, I feel like most of you are going to say that this is the first time you've heard of this game before. But leave me a comment down below and tell me if you ever played it, because I would be curious. And if you haven't played it, definitely check it out. It does have a lot of charm, and the body swapping mechanic is a good time as well. It's just one of those games that can be slightly frustrating in practice, because it definitely wants to extract as much money out of you as possible, which seemed to be a thing with Technos games. I'm going to continually get knocked off this little conveyor belt here and staggered over and over again, and you take damage when you do. But the most hilarious thing is, when you actually get through this area, you jump down into that pit anyway to continue on, and there's no damage taken whatsoever. So from a story and gameplay perspective, it feels a little bit unfair because that's what we were going anyway. But you do get a good selection of playable characters, 4 in total, and considering you can possess every single character in the game that's not a boss, really you're talking more about like 15 to 16 by my count different playable characters you can use, and you would think that would give you a much expanded moveset, but honestly a lot of the enemy opponents you're going to be facing have a very similar moveset to one of the characters in the game, so it's not going to be as big as you think. And you can pick whatever character you want, you get to use one, learn one, and it does become a lot of fun. But again, as we get into the middle of this game, I do love Technos graphics, and I love that they give you a little bit of story here. We have to save the world. Honestly, it's like story in an arcade games, like story in an adult film. It's there, but you don't need it. But I love that midway through, we get this horror aesthetic. The game completely shifts. We go from a construction site to the forest to like basically a secret lab, and then we go into what looks like something out of Capcom's Ghouls and Ghosts. Although you do need to knock these blocks here down, and if you're too close to them as it falls, apparently it gives you damage. Never understood it whatsoever. Kind of just feels like a slowdown in the game versus actually being something that should be there in the first place. But I'm going to give you one more sample of the soundtrack, because this track that's coming up next I actually do really like, and I'll show you the last area in the game, which is one of the most interesting I've ever seen in a beat 'em up. But enjoy! Super fun soundtrack there, and we are fighting the devil himself, Lucifer, and again, save those power-ups. They're going to take so much life bar off the bosses versus your normal attacks on Lucifer here are going to be basically poke damage. But I love that the big bad guy in the game hid the hardest boss inside of Lucifer's stomach. You get shrunken down, the devil himself eats you, and you need to fight the last stage through the insides of the devil's anatomy. I don't know who came up with the idea, but I absolutely love it, and it's a really fun way to end the game. And you can take over these monsters as well, and that's always a lot of fun, but honestly they're some of the weaker ones in the game, so just staying as your normal character is probably going to be the best way to go. And I love these. I'm really not sure what they're supposed to be that melted there. I think you can probably guess. Always a thing in arcade games, they try to make enemies look like you know what, but I will say that it's very not fair to be able to just run off the actual stage. You would think it would constrict you there, but you can totally just walk off to your own death. But I will say the first stage of the final boss fight is one of the most hilarious in this game for all of the wrong reasons. If you just rush forward and get beyond the boss's attack, you can sit here and unload on it the entire time, and it is impossible for you to take any damage whatsoever. It definitely prolongs the fight because you're not hitting it with the strongest attacks, but this is a free victory on the first form of the boss. Just stand here. You can even move a little bit further forward. As long as you're far enough into the screen, none of the attacks are going to be able to hit you. For as hard as this game is, they definitely had a little bit of a programming error here. Maybe they just never thought that anyone would run this far forward, but it is an instance in which the first part of the final boss is a free victory, but this game's been so hard up until this point in time, you definitely want to take that victory and save a few virtual quarters. But as you get into the second stage of this boss fight, it's going to go from a complete free victory to one of the hardest things in the game. I'm not going to show you the ending, it is quite fun actually, but that has been Shadow Force. Hard B tier game, definitely check it out if you've never played it, but we're done and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.